Welcome to Key Title's Title Corner. Shannon Smith, the agency manager for Key Title here, and I'm with Kelsey Hathaway, who is our in-house attorney and also market manager. And Kelsey, welcome so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I thought we would have just sort of a casual conversation about title insurance and title searches. And maybe what we could do is start out with just a quick little background about yourself. If maybe you could share with the group your background and the experience that you bring.
Yeah, so I've been an attorney in North Carolina since 2010. And the majority of that time, I have been a closing attorney for real estate transactions. I really love real estate. I love dealing with the public. I love title problems. I love solving them, and I love helping people get to closing. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I enjoy doing what I do.
Wonderful. Well, we're so lucky to have Kelsey back as part of our team, and we're actually very privileged in the fact that we do have two attorneys on staff. And so what we try to do is we provide as much service as possible to the real estate agents as well as our attorney customers. And one of the things that we get asked quite often is we'll oftentimes receive an email or a phone call from an agent, and they're asking about particulars about a piece of property.
Right.
And so what we're able to do as the title company is we can proactively look for that prior title policy, which is wonderful because it's sort of a snapshot of what the attorney was looking at the time that they issued the policy. However, there's a number of things that can come up after that policy is issued. And so, therefore, it's really important to have a title search done and have an attorney review all of the information. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the process from the time that the agent sends you the contract and maybe from that point to closing as it relates to title insurance.
Yeah, so the first thing that happens if I'm in private practice, which I'm no longer in private practice, I work for a title company, but when I was a closing attorney, the first thing that happens to open the transaction is I get a contract. And as soon as I get the contract, I put it in line to search the title. Now, the title search is something that an attorney is responsible for in North Carolina, and that's not the case in every state. In a lot of states, and especially when buyers come here, they're coming from other states, they're used to the title company doing everything. The title company, for instance, in New York, does the title search, they certify the title, they insure the title, they close the transaction. That is not how it works in North Carolina. We are separate. So the title company insures the transaction and the closing attorney handles the title work and the settlement itself. So once I search the title and the closing has actually been scheduled, we're working closely with the lender if it's a loan transaction, or the realtor directly if it's just a cash transaction, to get all the necessary information to be able to get to closing. So all the invoices that we need, and any requirements from the title company that have to be accomplished. And then we get to the closing table and we can actually handle the actual closing, recording, and disbursement of proceeds.
Great. So let me ask you, when an agent sends a contract in that scenario, is it helpful for them to let you know as an attorney handling settlement early on in the transaction if they have a preferred title company? And if so, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's really important for me early on in the transaction, if I'm in private practice as a closing attorney, to know that there is a title company that either is affiliated with the realtor or for whatever reason the buyer prefers, because the sooner I can connect directly with that title company, the easier it is for me to be able to issue that binder with that title company. It's harder for me closer to the end of the transaction to make a switch because I've already worked with a particular provider, a title insurer, that's already given me the information I need and already made a commitment to insure the transaction. And it's just not as professional to switch at the last minute. So the earlier I know, the easier it is for me to honor those requests.
Let me ask you, when a title company is looped in the very beginning and they are proactive in forwarding a prior title policy to you if they're able to find it, do you find that helpful? And also, if for some reason a prior policy isn't found, are there other ways that maybe we could find savings for the consumer even without Key Title finding that prior title policy.
Absolutely. I love getting the prior policy. It's fantastic. If a title company says, we found it, here it is. The reason why we want that prior policy, not to get too deep in the weeds, but it helps us get the lowest possible rate for the buyer as far as a title premium. But the great thing, the second part of your question, the great thing about North Carolina and many states is that even if I pull a competitor policy, so a title policy from a different title insurer, I can still get that low rate and issue with Key Title. So there is no difference in pricing. Whether the policy came from Key Title or it came from another title provider, I can still get the buyer the lowest possible rate because everybody honors the same policies, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's wonderful. So there is a potential for reissue credit or tacking credit based on a prior policy, even if it isn't with our underwriter investor's title.
Absolutely,
correct?
yeah.
Very good. One thing too I get asked often is for information around public records. You know, the agent will maybe be in the very beginning stages where they're about to go on a listing presentation, and they may see some things or hear some things that are sort of red flags around the transaction. Maybe if you could just talk to me a little bit about what the preliminary title search is and what information that you share with the title company that we use maybe to determine insurability. Like, what are the things that you're looking for typically during that search period, and then when you're sending over your legal opinion, which we rely on?
Right. So as a closing attorney, the searches that we would be doing include liens searches, tax history. We're looking for chain of title. We're looking for anything that would affect the insurability of the property, any issues along the chain of title that could require some additional steps to be able to get to the closing table.
Great. I do know that North Carolina is one of the least expensive states for title insurance, and I know one of the main reasons for that is the fact that the transaction is being supervised by a licensed attorney. And so we value our relationships with all of the attorneys that we do business with across the state, and we rely on their legal opinion. And we need that as part of the transaction. So what we typically do if somebody reaches out to us is we can give them that prior title policy, and we can explain to them what that title policy says, but that's pretty much where we're limited.
Right.
We do try to encourage the agents to go to the attorney that's handling settlement. But in the case that I was mentioning before, if they're going in and they want to be proactive and maybe avoid some potential title issues at the last minute, and they're going in for the listing presentation and they just need some basic information, I think at this point, this is when that relationship with the attorney really comes into play, having a go-to attorney. And maybe you can talk to me a little bit about what that looks like from your perspective, having been on the settlement side, having that relationship with an agent that maybe primarily sends the majority of their work to you. Are there instances where you may be able to give them a little bit of extra guidance if they're reaching out to you about a property that they think could be a potential title problem?
Closing attorneys generally do want to be helpful. We don't want to be a roadblock to the transaction, being able to get to the closing. I think it's great. When I was in private practice, I would get realtors that would say, oh my gosh, we've got an estate. We got this problem. I got JoJo that's not willing to sign, and the mama's not anywhere to be found, and we got all these things that are coming up. And I love to sit down with a realtor and say, okay, these are the steps. This is the process. These are the things that the title company is going to require, and frankly, what I require as a closing attorney, to be able to insure that buyer, to make sure that they do have a title without title issues. So for sure, love talking to realtors. And, it's just human behavior that the more you work with somebody, you do tend to give them a little bit more help. If I would get a phone call from a realtor that had an emergency on a weekend, but it's somebody that I deal with on a regular basis, I'm much more likely to pick up the phone and say, I'm happy to help you on a weekend. I'm happy to help you on off hours, because the more you work with people, the more you value those relationships. And that's really just human nature.
Yeah. And I know for sure, having worked with you when you were on the settlement side, that you're that type of attorney. And we have a number of them that we work with across the state that really want to be a resource for the agent and really want to help, because if you're being helped by them early in on the transaction and then you send that transaction to them, you've already done a lot of the legwork. And like you said, in an estate situation where you may have to be chasing down signatures or something like that, it really is valuable to get everybody on board with any potential issues, any red flags that you hear about. I know one of the things that we're hearing a lot about is seller fraud, and there's a lot going on around that. And so maybe what you can do, if you don't mind, is tell us maybe during the search process, what is it that you look for as far as red flags, also maybe to prevent against a fraudulent type situation? Because we are hearing more and more of that right now.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that. A few months ago, we had a realtor call and say, I've got the best situation. I've got this seller that's contacted me. They do happen to be overseas, but they're willing to sell this property quickly. They want to go under market. I've explained, this is the realtor saying, I've explained that we could actually market it for much higher, but they're ready to go and all these things. And I pumped the brakes, as did my boss, and we all said, okay, well, there's some red flags there. The fact that they want a really quick close, the fact that it's undervalued, the fact that you're never going to have any real contact with that person. She'd also never been able to get him on the phone. So there's lots of things that an attorney can do preemptively to sort of say, hey, if no one's told you this is happening, because the closing attorney is really getting all the brunt of those issues. So it's easy for us to say this is a red flag, even if the realtor hasn't had that happen to them specifically. So we do love to talk to them about those things when they do come up.
And that's helpful. Having the relationship, I think, is key, for lack of a pun, but I do think it's key. And you do rely quite a bit on those legal opinions, as do we. What are some of the red flags that agents should look for or listen for when thinking about potential title issues or title challenges? What are some of the red flags?
Yeah. Well, I will say before I give you the red flags that North Carolina has some of the lowest title claims consistently. There are title issues all across the country, and North Carolina is known for having very few title claims in general. And I think it's because the title company and the attorneys are completely separate. We don't house everything under one roof. And it's separate checks and balances. It's separate groups of people looking at the same issues to make sure that everything gets solved appropriately. But when there are title claims, if you're a realtor, the things to look out for initially, if your client tells you there's an estate, if it's still open, if there's a bankruptcy in the chain of title, if there's a foreclosure, if a lot of work has been done on the property, we're worried about what we call mechanics liens, so liens against the property, the potential lien claimants that could file and say they haven't been paid. Other issues, unfortunately, old uncanceled deeds of trust, probably one of the biggest headaches, and that is really a situation where it's almost always a line of credit that's been drawn against the property that perhaps has never even been used. It's been paid down to zero, and you get to closing and it just doesn't get canceled. It is still a lien against the property. As strange as that sounds, those have to be canceled almost always. And so we work very closely with the attorneys to do everything we can to get those things resolved by closing.
So an agent, if they're going in on a listing presentation and they're going through the seller disclosure and they're talking to them about things that the seller knows that are out there, one of the questions may be, had you ever had an equity line of credit or a second mortgage?
Yeah.
Do you know if that was satisfied and recorded as satisfied, or what would be a good question for them to ask around those types of things, like things that you may not know about, but that they could maybe proactively just ask the right question. I'm thinking that might be one of them, right?
Yeah, well, bankruptcies and estates are going to be pretty obvious because the entities are going to be involved. But it's always good to ask the client, have you done major work on the property? Anything over $30,000 would be something significant to know about. And I do encourage realtors to say, how many mortgages, we use mortgages the same interchangeably with the terminology deed of trust, even though we are a deed of trust state. But you will ask the client, how many mortgages do you have on the property? And I can't tell you the number of times that we will get that sheet turned in from the realtor and it will say there's one deed of trust on the property and we find the second one. And even the client is often surprised to say, that's, I didn't know that was out there, and it's something that has to be dealt with. But yeah, the more you know about the property, the more information you can share with the closing attorney ahead of time, the better off you'll be, because the earlier that we can deal with those problems, the sooner we can get to the closing table.
Smoother closing. Kelsey, I've heard you say this before. What do you mean when you say defer to the closing attorney?
Okay, yes. So this will happen in context of a realtor may call a title company professional and say, we've got a problem, we're supposed to close next week, but the closing attorney is telling us that all these things have to be done or we can't close on time. Can you help us? So that's when I pump the brakes and say, thank you for calling. I can't give you legal advice. I am an attorney, but I work for the title company now. I am not in private practice, and I can't tell you what is good for your client. Only the closing attorney can do that. And frankly, the closing attorney is in the best possible position to do that because they have the whole picture in front of them. That attorney has searched the title, they have looked at it from different angles, and I get pieces of it as a title company professional.
It's like a game of telephone.
Yeah. And we work closely with closing attorneys. We have a great rapport with them. The attorneys that we work with constantly, we understand where they're coming from. We know about, what they need to get to the closing table, and we work with them to solve problems easily. But we do not overrule the attorney, which is what I try to gently say to people who say, hey, can we do something different? We are not here to go around the attorney. We will almost always land in the same place that the attorney has originally told you is required.
And really, it's about what's in the best interest of the consumer. You really want them to make sure that they have marketable title. They have something that they can sell. When it comes time to sell, there's not going to be some old thing that's there. And that's what title insurance is really for.
Yeah.
And we really rely on the expertise of the attorney handling settlement because they may see things that we don't see and they may hear things that we don't hear. So thank you for answering that for me. That makes sense, and I think that will be helpful for the agents as well. Maybe you could touch upon briefly the importance of working with a good title company, maybe why it might make a difference to work with a company like Key Title versus maybe some of the other title companies out there. Just maybe your experience with working with other underwriters in general. Maybe you could just talk about the part that Key Title plays in the transaction from your perspective.
Yeah, so I will say that all title insurers, and I use the word insurer and title company kind of synonymously, all title insurers, the big ones, Investors Title, which is our underwriter, First American, Chicago, all of them have national standards that they're required to follow when looking at a piece of property, when looking at a title search coming from an attorney to determine what is required to be able to insure that property. So all of them are going to have a pretty standard set of rules and regulations. And one of the questions I get a bunch from realtors is, can we just switch title companies? Can we just, we're getting a set of circumstances that's requiring us to delay closing. Can we go to a different insurer if we can't, for instance, get investors to get this done quickly for us, or we can't follow the steps quickly enough? Can we switch? And that's when I would usually pump the brakes and say, 9 times out of 10, probably even more frequently, all of the insurers, because they're under such national standards, usually fall on the same line of insurability. So in other words, you don't get to go around the rules by switching providers. This isn't Pepsi and Coke, we all have we all have standards and we all have rules and we have to follow those. So often it's usually because someone unfortunately is picking and choosing the details that they think are important, calling up their favorite title company and saying, hey, will you insure? Here's the issues. And then the title company may initially say, sure, we can take care of that. But usually when you go back to them and explain to them all the additional facets that are so critical, they will backpedal pretty quickly and say, I'm sorry, we fall in the same category as the other title company you've already talked to. So there's really no easy shortcut around what is required.
Yeah, the key again, for lack of a pun, is marketability of title. And like you said, it really, there is standards that are held by the American Land Title Association that all of the underwriters fall under. I do know too, though, that sometimes having an experienced underwriter can help. Tell me a little bit about what it's like as an attorney when you're in the process of working on a more complicated transaction that appears to have potential title issues. If there's something that comes up, what do you do when you're in that review process? Do you reach out to the title company and maybe talk to additional, like maybe other attorneys or in-house counsel about what can be done, and what does that look like from your perspective?
Well, I think with any business, the staff are really key. The experience level, the willingness to devote to customer service, frankly, the staff morale, how a company is run, extremely affect the kind of relationship and the kind of work product that you get from them. So while I do say that, all title insurers have these standards and you should end up falling along the same lines with any one title company that you pick, there is a huge difference between talking to a title company that has been in business 4 or 5 years, maybe is out of Tennessee, doesn't really understand North Carolina law. They're trying to expand. They've got a lot of turnover because they're brand new. They have underwriters that have just barely been trained. Those folks are going to unfortunately be a lot more difficult for a closing attorney to work with to get something to the closing table quicker and easily and more smoothly, just because they don't have quite the experience or the longevity in the business that you want from a title company. So I do think it changes vastly depending on which provider that you pick.
That's good to know, because we do have some agents that are proactive in talking about title insurance with their buyers and explaining to them about the relationship with Key Title and the partnership. And then there's others that get discouraged. They may ask for Key Title, but they may not get the documentation that they need, and they may not see the value in the relationship and not really understand how we may be working behind the scenes, advocating for them in some cases, and working through legal counsel, legal support to make sure that what we're doing is insurable. But I think sometimes they hesitate. I think maybe sometimes there might be some discomfort around talking about title insurance in general, or, thinking that, all title companies are the same. Maybe what you could do is talk about the benefits of. So my thought is, as we say to the agents, it's really great for you to have a go-to attorney. Do you find that the attorneys have a few go-to title companies that they work with? And if so, why would they have some that they would prefer over others, maybe?
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on that, but I will say that when I was in private practice, I had a handful of title companies that probably got the majority of the title orders that I could possibly send them. And that's because they had great staff that were willing to deal with my problems, sometimes after hours. Jenna is one of those people. Jenna Bryan, our in-house counsel. She's incredible. She devotes so much time to solving problems and wants to work with attorneys, and I love that about her. So as someone who was in private practice who had an array of title companies to choose from, when it came time for me to switch from private practice to working for a title company, this was my first choice by far because I love working with a title company that knows what they're doing, that's been in business a long time, that has, the stamina to keep going and to get me to the closing table. So I think it's a huge difference to work with a company that knows what they're doing.
Well, that's quite the endorsement. So thank you. We're really grateful to have you back on our team, and we're really looking forward to continuing to remain a resource for the agents. And you can always email us at info@keytitlellc.net with any questions that you may have, or you can call us at 919-783-5544. And we do have attorneys on staff.
We do.
And we are very proud of our relationship with our underwriter. They're considered the gold standard in the state. So the combination of the two, I feel like, is a winning combination. Please let us know if there's anything we can do. If we can't answer it, we can certainly put you in touch with an excellent attorney. So thank you so much. And Kelsey, thank you so much for taking this time with us to answer questions. And feel free to reach out. We'll be sending some literature too to back up this video. So we look forward to connecting and talking more about how we can help you with your title insurance needs. Thank you.